Throughout the course of Devon Larratt's career, he has completely changed his outlook on the sport of arm wrestling. He went from the guy who always tested his frame to the limit and held on to people for all that he was worth to the King's moving, running version of Devon we see today. But how did all this happen? And more importantly, why did this happen? I think that Devon's technical journey in this sport is very eye-opening as to what truly matters in arm wrestling, as well as being a great example of how to avoid injury. When Devon Larratt very first started arm wrestling, his entire game was about bending his wrist and bringing his shoulder forward. This is where the legendary turn and burn phrase was popularized. Devon did have the capability of top rolling if he wanted to, but when everything was on the line, he would always default back to inside arm wrestling because that's where he was the strongest. Even in 2008, when Devon faced John Brzenk, we see moments of Devon returning to his default. Devon opens with a top roll in round 1 and is able to nearly flash pin John. We see that even in 2008, Devon did have a pretty crispy top roll and it was very effective. However, in round 2, we see Devon attempt this top roll again. But this time around, John attempts to force Devon into a hook and is successful in doing so. Immediately after this, we see Devon return to his default strongest position at the time, which is to commit his shoulder, test his frame, and bend his wrist. Devon does win this match 6-0 and becomes the #1 arm wrestler on the planet in the unlimited weight category. However, we see that Devon is still a versatile all-around arm wrestler. He used multiple techniques within a single match in order to win. A few years later at Arm Wars, we see more of the same. Devon is working on his top roll and it is very effective. However, his deep hook is still his leading weapon that he returns to when he really needs to win a match. Although left-handed, this is very evident in his match with Travis Bagent at Arm Wars. In the initial rounds, we see Devon attempt to hit outside and top roll, but this proves to be just about impossible versus Travis. There are moments where Devon is able to get stops and grind matches back from ugly positions, but what really won Devon this match in the end is a change of technique. We see Devon once again commit his shoulder, test his frame, and bend his wrist, and this works out very well for him. Travis is unable to get outside and go around Devon's power. Devon is able to force the hook on Travis, and once in the hook, Devon is nearly unbeatable. We continue to see that Devon is crafting his perfect top roll in his secret lair, but when he actually needs to use it on the table, it ends up not quite being there, and he reverts back to turn and burn. This is also right around the time when we saw the legendary Hook Training 2 video from Devon. This video showed us how powerful Devon really was in the hook. He managed to lift nearly 180 pounds from a defensive hook position. We see in this lift that Devon is using somewhere around a 50-50 split of back pressure and side pressure to lift this weight. So basically, Devon's defensive hook is just insane at this moment. But this is where everything turned for the worse. While Devon's inside game was probably the strongest it had ever been, his elbows just couldn't take it any longer. In 2012, Devon had a match with Tim Bresnan. Just the year before, Devon destroyed Tim at Arm Wars, but this time around, Devon looked like a totally different puller. The unbreakable bicep and elbow lock that he had in the past was now getting ripped through. Devon was in big trouble in this match. Although he did manage to barely win over a long, grueling war, to this day it is very controversial because of the reffing, and some people maintain that Tim was the true winner. After this, it became clear to Devon that something needed to change. He ended up getting multiple surgeries on his elbow. This did help to clear up a lot of the inflammation in Devon's elbow and remove scar tissue, but at the same time, it also removed all the stability in Devon's elbow. Devon's incredible center table side pressure was just not the same after this. This leads us to the legendary match between John Brzenk and Devon Larratt at WAL. We see Devon trying to hook John, and while he does have some success, he doesn't look anything like his former self. Devon ends up using the most awkward and open hook I've ever seen. He completely relies on arm break position to prevent the pin, and his center table pressure is just gone. And John Brzenk, although far older than the last time they faced each other, ends up defeating Devon this time around. Over this period of time, Devon became much more focused on his outside game, and we began to see Devon really focusing on his top roll. A lot of people consider Devon to be primarily an outside arm wrestler at this point. But then this happened. Devon Larratt pulled Michael Todd at WAL for the #1 rank in that league. In the opening round, we see Devon with the top roll, but even after all this time, we see once again that as soon as Devon begins to panic, he switches back to his default. He opens in a top roll and then switches to an inside move. He commits his shoulder and tests his frame. Only this time, Devon loses. Devon's inside game was simply not strong enough to deal with the King's move of Michael Todd. And I think this moment is the moment that Devon truly changed everything. Shortly after this match against Michael Todd, we see Devon Larratt versus Todd Hutchings. In this match, Devon shows us something new. Devon Larratt, the once greatest hook arm wrestler in the world, now has a King's move. I think if Devon would have hooked Todd Hutchings, he probably would have lost the match. But by using the King's move, he won 3-0. And just a few months later, Devon pulled Dave Chafee at WAL 504. Once again, we see Devon using the King's move and having great success.
He's had Mr. Sacrifice, and Devon Larratt is baiting him. He's talking to him. 3 fouls, and it's again for Devon, and Devon wasn't attacking back there. He was letting Dave feel like he was in the match.
If Devon tried to beat Dave using his former style, he probably would have lost. But by committing fully to the outside, Devon comes out on top. Once Devon started using the King's move, I can't recall a single match after that when Devon opened with an inside move as his leading weapon. We later see Devon get another chance at Michael Todd in 2020, but this time things are very different. Devon's outside game has clearly leveled up. Devon is able to rise up over Michael's King's move and never needs to touch his inside game, except when he wanted to in order to showboat. Another thing that heavily changed in Devon's arm wrestling game is his training. In the past, we had seen things like hook training too, where Devon's inside power was put on display. But after surgery, Devon had pretty much stopped training side pressure entirely. In fact, we've even started to see Devon using reverse side pressure in his matches. He was no longer worried about center table, but instead his only focus was controlling the high ground and winning hand control. In the build-up to Devon's match with Levon in 2022, we saw that Devon was fully committed to his outside game in his training. Pretty much the only thing Devon cared about was pronation and rising. Devon's plan was to force Levon to hold on to him and therefore put all of the pressure directly into Levon's cupping, and it worked perfectly. The only problem is that Levon's cupping is so ridiculously strong that he won 6-0 anyway, but the concept was there. And later, against Evgeny Prudnik, we saw a much better example of how effective Devon's new style was. In the very first Ready Go, we saw Prudnik attempt to bend his wrist versus Devon, and he literally just bounced off of Devon's arm. Devon's pronation and elbow flexors were so strong that Prudnik's wrist just melted away. This allowed Devon to control the high ground and thus control the technical flow of the match. And once he did that, he pretty much could do whatever he wanted to. And this brings us to the current Devon Larratt. He has now concluded that controlling the high ground is the only thing that matters in the sport of arm wrestling. He maintains that all of the crazy side pressure and hook training he did for so many years is actually not what matters. If you can control the high ground, you can potentially control everything. So Devon Larratt went from the guy that is all about side pressure and holding on to his opponent to the guy who never holds on at all and literally uses reverse side pressure sometimes. And to be honest, Devon seems to be having just as much if not more success using this technique. Devon's new technique is also much healthier on your joints. So if you're new to the sport of arm wrestling and are worried about arm breaks and elbow injuries, committing fully to an outside strategy could be a great option. But what I'm very curious to hear about from you guys is, do you think that this is the future of the sport? It seems like over the years, top rolling has become more and more popular, but I think the success Devon has been having lately is the icing on the cake. I think that over the next few years, we will see more and more people not caring at all about side pressure and only caring about back pressure, pronation, and rising. And shoutouts to Devon Larratt for being a living experiment so that we can be healthier and stronger at the same time.